Friends, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
As scripture says, how great it is when brothers and sisters and siblings of the Spirit can be together, and here we are. It's wonderful to be with all of you this morning as we kick off our first Sunday of adult formation this season. We happen to have the theme of Trailblazers this year, and how fitting it is that the Faith and Race Initiative be our first class offering with this robust panel of Presbyterians as we discuss many of the issues that our congregations, in particular Presbyterian congregations, are facing when it comes to issues of race relations, and how we best live into that future as faithfully as we possibly can. Good morning, Patrick. I'm Jacob Bolton, Associate Pastor of Christian Formation here at the church. And one thing that you do not see is Rebecca Motley. And that is because over the summer, our Director of Adult Formation, Reverend Rebecca Motley, found another call. And so that is why Rebecca is not here. We happen to have an open search currently for a Director of Adult Formation. And so if you know anyone that is outside of our congregation, if you know anyone that is within our congregation that might be interested in that position, please do let us know. Our church has a very robust history, right, of hiring from within. We just did that with Carrie Parsons. We've done that with Patty Chamberlain, Nancy Hall-Barons, my guy Art, back when Art and I were colleagues. He's not anymore, he is retired, but we've done that in the past. And so if that is something that either somebody that you know or something that you might happen to be interested in, please do share that good news with me and the search committee. But it is very important that I introduce to you all today the Reverend Scott Planting. Scott, right there, waving at everyone. Let's give Scott a round of applause. Or a handshake. Scott happens to be an honorably retired Presbyterian minister who was helping us out on Sunday mornings as our adult formation Sunday morning formation host. Right? He is not the Director of Adult Formation, but he is being, oh, did somebody say yet? Opportunity knocks. There we go. That would be a blessing. But anyway, Scott is here. This is his first Sunday in here in this role. And we are so incredibly blessed to have you working in this fashion. I hope that it both feeds you as well as not taking too much time out of your honorable retired status. Scott, thank you so much. Two more things. The first is that I am sure you all have seen emails about focus groups regarding our upcoming potential capital campaign. Now, there are 30-ish focus groups, times where one could go and attend those, and I cannot encourage strongly enough each of you to attend them. You can attend more than one. There is no limit. If you want to attend all 30, you could get a badge. I don't know. But seriously, what you will note when you look at the calendar of when these events set up is that some are offered at 9:45 on a Sunday morning. Judge, you know where this is going. We are a congregation of 1,100. There are not 1,100 in here right now. I don't think we will have 1,100 in the Haverkamp room. However, there is a good group of us that meets each week at this time. And I would encourage all of you to not only to attend focus groups, but to attend a focus group that is not at this time. We can do this, right? So that we can all join together at this time the next couple of weeks and share the good news of adult formation. Are there any questions about any of that?
Where are those groups going to meet if they're not in here?
They're in the chapel. Good question. Those are taking place. Every single one of them is in the chapel.
They're all in the chapel.
Yes, absolutely. You'll learn more about that, Prue. First one's today after church. Yep. But I've talked way too much. Let us pray. Loving God, we give you such thanks for new beginnings and for difficult discussions. And so we pray that today is a little bit of all of that. We give you thanks for the incredible panel that's gathered and for the faithful work of the Faith and Race Initiative. Be with us today and be with us always. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And with that, I will turn the class over to our panel and to Steve Denne, our moderator. Thank you so much.
Good morning and welcome. We're so pleased you're here this morning. The Faith and
race initiative, Melynda and myself are the co-leads for it. We feel our trail is not yet blazing, but it's not because we're not trying. And one of the themes for us this year, having spent almost 2 years with many of you exploring opportunities for our own education and learning, is to really reach out beyond the resources of Westminster and to learn and get inspiration from other churches, other congregations, other people of faith in terms of how we can move down this trail in a way that hopefully leads to blazing eventually. So I'm so pleased to have colleagues from other local Northern Virginia Presbyterian churches to share their experiences to date that I hope we can learn from and perhaps even share a little bit that will help their path as well. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and my request is to introduce yourself, give us a thumbnail sketch of your church and how you've been involved in faith and race work at your church in the last couple of years or whatever is relevant for it. So maybe we'll start at the far end with Dan and we'll work our way across.
I like that Christian sentiment of the last will be first. So Dan Campbell from Trinity Presbyterian over by the hospital, what used to be the Virginia Hospital Center. So let's see, our church is about 600. We have had a racial justice ministry that started in 2016, even actually before a certain person was elected. And it was started by a couple of young mothers in our congregation who wanted to find a way for our church to support their attempts to educate their children about racial justice. So it was really started as, how do we build up our children? And as I just quoted to Melynda a minute ago, one of my mentors says, as bends the shoot, so grows the tree. So that is how we got started. And what else can I say? We have a listserv very much like yours of about 50 people that we send notices about both the operations of our committee and events in the community. And we are also members as of 2021 of Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement, which is known as VOICE, that you may hear about also, as a way of acting on, our purpose has been to educate ourselves and then take action toward establishing God's community, God's vision, kingdom in the world through racial justice activities. And that VOICE is one way that we do that. We can talk about that.
Can you say a little bit about yourself and about your involvement with Trinity?
I never mind talking about myself, unfortunately. I actually grew up on Crest Street all my life. Attended Blessed Sacrament Catholic Community. Switched over to Presbyterianism by marriage. I've been a member of Trinity for 32 years, and I'm an elder there. I'm not currently a ruling elder. By the way, growing up in Alexandria in a multicultural, multiracial community really did form me. And I was blessed to have a family that just driving over here, I live in Oakton now, driving over here, I just get this warm feeling. Yeah. It's just fantastic. I just have such great memories of growing up in Alexandria. Again, in a family that took me to the March on Washington, the original March on Washington, we had Cesar Chavez visit our church, and then we marched with him. So you get an idea of my background.
Thank you, John.
Ooh. I wasn't going to bring, I thought this might be too much, but it's perfect. Thank you. I did not grow up in that family, but my mother and father, when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, helped a young teacher who was a veteran of World War II, protected him for a night or two, along with some other friends, as they tried to get him out of town because he was in threat of violence, because he was a biology teacher at our school in Central Florida. And he taught that it didn't matter where the transfusions came from on the front line.
Blood transfusion.
The blood transfusions. The blood was just as good. And he was run out of town. Was threatened with physical harm. And this small group, about a third of the size of this room, helped him get out of town. And the rest of them, except for my parents, eventually left to this part of the country. That's my family background. And I grew up in that environment, not as immersed. It was more in traditional Southern rural towns. My father owned some rental properties, the huts that were left over from training camps. And he eventually gave them to the renters. And I would ride in the back of the pickup as he collected rent on Saturday mornings. That's my family. So it's out of that number 7, what you all have accomplished so far is what I experienced when we were in Central Florida, in a church about this size, and Sunday school that was about this size did number 7, offered Christian formation courses, workshops, and resources for adults. This was an adult class. And what caught my attention was a book that they were going to review that had been sitting on my coffee table for 2 years because I was just too afraid to open the book. And it was Waking Up White. Yes. And we took 2 months and worked through that book. And that's where I overcame my fears. Then we moved here. We're in a small church, about 1/10 the size of this church. The pastor is a very close friend of my Mary and I. And she's the pastor, Diane Walton Hendricks. And I'm particularly focused personally on the vulnerable families prenatal to age 2. So I was asking her, are there any things here, any organizations that involved in that kind of thing? I knew the specific organization, but it's on the other side of Fairfax County. And I'd rather do something a little bit closer to the church. She said, yes, Voice. And so we followed I got to know some of the staff, and we followed their development process, which sounds sort of like what could be the next step for you, just something to think about. because your foundation is really fantastic, way ahead of where we are as a church in terms of establishing vocabulary. You can now talk to people throughout your church. They may not agree with what you're thinking about, but you will be a bubble in this church. And I saw that bubble in my church in Central Florida that was the same size. Jumping back to that, one of the things we did during the middle of that 2-month period while we were studying Waking Up White was we asked the preacher to preach a sermon on justice work. And we were prepared to be rejected. And he did. Now, he didn't, nothing happened. It may have been, but I don't think so. This is Central Florida. Remember, it was just not too long ago that people were being run out of town. So this group can have that kind of influence in terms of it influencing what needs to come from the pulpit. Because one of the things that Diane has done is she has introduced fairly substantially justice issues, justice work into her sermons. First as a series, and then I could hear it. The word justice will come out at least once a sermon. So we followed the voice process. We've done some listening training for about 10 people. It takes 6 to get started. So you all don't need to feel drawn to this. But if there are 6 of you, that'll do. You can get started with that. If you're our Sunday school class, I don't know how strong Sunday school classes are here. That's a good place to start. So we are at the point now of where a good number of people in our congregation have been listened to. We've done a little bending, and we have a vocabulary about like what you have.
Thank you. Kate.
I'm Kate Theisen. I'm a member of Old Presbyterian Meeting House. It's hard to follow you guys, Ken and John. I did not grow up having experiences that you all did. I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland. Not diverse at all. Like Dan, I did grow up Catholic and went to school and became Presbyterian by marriage. And the marriage is no more, but Presbyterian is still going strong.
We win.
Exactly. So I've been a member of diocese for about 35 years. Old Presbyterian Meeting House attracted us and then it's held me because there has been a lot of interest in social justice issues in general. I read, for example, your mission report that you did as a result of your work, and a lot of the organizations that you support, either financially or with people actively involved, many of those we share with you all. So there have been pockets of people who have taken this step farther than giving money. One of our members, Marcia Ray, was one of the founding. She was in Voice from the beginning. I think it started in 2006. And there were a number of people, a small core of people, in addition to Marcia, who have been involved with Voice from the beginning. Let's see, so I've again appreciated the different pastors. Well, we had one in particular, Gary Charles was pastor from 1993 to, I just looked up, I think 11 to 13 years, somewhere like that. Very, very strong preacher, strong advocate for social justice. One example of what he's done in the Alexandria community is found Alexandria Tutoring Consortium. So that was something, as soon as I retired 9 years ago, that was one of the first things I did. And that and a few other volunteer opportunities once I retired have really sort of boosted my interest in the social justice arena and racial justice arena. And of course, being in Alexandria, I raised my kids. We lived on Russell Road for 26 years. All 3 of my kids were born and raised here. They went to what was then called T.C. Williams High School. So they grew up in a much more diverse environment than I did, and so they are much more attuned to race issues than I grew up as. I started getting even more involved though once the pandemic started and with the murder of George Floyd. And I think we'll pivot to what our churches are doing specifically, but at that time we did form what we call a dismantling racism team, or DRT. I was in that from the beginning. And then I also around that time started my involvement with Voice. I will confess, and we can touch on this later too, that I've pulled back somewhat from OPMH's DRT, and I'm now involved in the Presbyterian's DRT. I'm a member of the National Capital Presbyterian Dismantling Racism team, and moving in, being more involved in Voice. And we can talk about why.
Thank you, Melynda.
So I'm Melynda Wilcox, and I have been a member here for 35 years. My husband David and I were married here, and our children were baptized here. 3 of the 4 of us are elders, and I just wanted to point out that that our founding minister, who's on the wall over there, Fred Haverkamp, was the organizing minister for Trinity Arlington. So we share that in common, which is kind of cool. So he left, he actually founded Westminster and then went and founded
We owe
Trinity.
you.
But anyway, so our church has been very involved in the community in lots of different ways, but I don't think we focused on the issue of racial justice until the murder of George Floyd. And at that point, the session formed a task force, which we called the Therefore Project. And there were about 12 of us on that task force. And we had some small group discussions with members, and we did a lot of talking and talking about our own backgrounds, kind of like the way we've done here. We did that as a task force. And I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, not a diverse area at all, and went to college in North Carolina and came to the DC area. And that's, really the first time that I experienced anything remotely diverse. But we did, as Kate did, we raised our kids here in Alexandria, and they went to what was then T.C. Williams High School. And so their growing up experience was very different from mine. And I think they're extremely grateful for having that, important aspect of their formation. So the Therefore Project, after it finished its work, sent a list of 9 recommendations to the session. And I just, for convenience, put a copy of those on the table so you can see. And the session adopted those. And for the most part, they have been accomplished. And so one of those recommendations was to write a history of Westminster, which actually I thought was going to be about a 4-page term paper, and became this book, which has kind of taken on a life of its own, which has been really exciting. And around the time that the Therefore Project finished up its work, Steve and I were having some discussions about how we could extend the work of the Therefore Project into the future, because really the point of the Therefore Project was to look at our past, our present, and our future. We've sort of done the past, we've done the present on the recommendations, and so what's next? And so we didn't really want to create a whole new committee structure, so Steve and I are just kind of winging it informally. But we've put together a number of activities that we've done, mostly so far in 2023. We had a group trip to the Freedom House Museum in Old Town. We went to a concert at the cathedral, which was performing a new work by a Black composer. We had a small group that went to Baltimore to see the Hip Hop at 50 exhibit. We had the book launch in June. We have a group of about 15 that are going to do a DC Black History Tour in October, and we've got
I
led by our certified tour guide, Eileen. And on December 3rd, we're going to be showing a documentary called At the River, which is a film about Southern Presbyterian ministers during the Civil Rights Movement. And so those are the kinds of things that we've been doing. We want to do more of this, but I think we also wanted to have more opportunities where we can have some real conversations around how do we, as individuals and as a faith community, extend the work of racial justice. So that's where we are right now. And you can certainly add to that if there's something you want.
I think you covered it. And again, this sort of good segue. We really want to learn from others' experiences. Melynda did a nice review of what we've done to date. Want to pose the same questions to the other panelists. Experiences so far in terms of successes, failures, challenges, and most importantly, at least to us, how will this guide what you see going forward over the next several years?
Why don't we go back, we'll go Kate.
All right.
We'll go back and forth.
So somewhat different from what you all have experienced. One of Marcia Ray, actually the member who was a founding member of Voice, put together a nice sort of history of the DRT from when we started in mid-2020 until last December.
Kate, could I ask, could you holler a little bit?
Gosh, I've been hearing that my whole life, sorry.
Project.
Yes. So at the beginning, we categorized what we wanted to do, we the DRT, into 3 general categories, which is learning about racism, building community and connections, and advocating for anti-racist policies. So a lot of the things that you said, Melynda, that you've been doing more recently, we did a lot of that the latter part of 2020 through 2021. Book studies, watching the documentary 13, having listening sessions, kind of along the lines of how voice structures things, and there would be, during that time, most everything was on Zoom, and people's lives, our lives were much more restricted, and we got a lot of interest. The early activities, the early book study, and the early documentary study, we would have upwards of 80 people on Zoom. But by the time people's lives came back and to whatever place they evolved to, the interest in participating in the different kinds of activities waned significantly, which is why I've ended up pulling back myself from OPMH's DRT. We don't have a listserv, we actually have a software package, congregational management package. And so that's how we do our communications. And that package allows us to have groups, interest groups, or other kinds of groups. I'm a deacon, and so we have a deacon group in there. So kind of like what you said about the listserv. So what was an example of what we had in Realm is the name of the package that we have. We put together, there's a subgroup called the Dismantling Racism Team and a larger group called Dismantling Racism that was put together based on who participated in very early activities in 2020. That group is a group online, the assembly of people has never been updated since 2020. So members have left, new people have come in. And so I recommended to the current chairs of DRT to not even publicize anything within that group anymore. I don't feel it's useful at all. So we have, I think I forgot to say, but OPMH has about 1,000 members, similar size to you all. They're somewhat over 300 members who are on our member bulletin board. So I recommended to our current DRT chairs that we publicize events and that's ongoing in the member bulletin board, because I think we can capture more people that way. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge is waning interest, too many competing things in life now. And so people are, I feel like I'm talking into a vacuum sometimes.
Can you say a word about your being in transition, just to give a context?
Oh, yes. So I mentioned a previous pastor, Gary Charles, who's very active in a number of ways. Then we had Rocky Leahy as our pastor from, he was here 17 and a half years, and his last sermon was on the last weekend of January. So we are in transition now. Our transitional pastor is James Sledge, who was senior pastor at Falls Church Presbyterian Church, and they are very active in anti-racism and social justice activities. Before we put out, maybe a lot of you are familiar with the process of bringing on a new pastor, but we had to construct, and this was new to me, or I became much more familiar with the process now. So we have to have the MIF, right, the ministry information form. So
Several of us know that one.
yeah, so that if you don't know,
Memorize.
so that's the document that describes who we are as a congregation. And so before that was put together, we had a weekend retreat and a very detailed survey that was administered by a third party to help us figure out who we are and where we want to go. And so the pastor nominating committee used the input from those two events to put together the MIF. And then they also had to, let's see, you all know the process better than me. So who puts together the PIF? Personally, that's the candidate. So we're in the process right now of the PNC is evaluating
Right.
PIFs.
Candidates.
So candidates, and I did, and Marcia Ray, who I mentioned about Boyd, she's also one of the PNC members. So what I've learned is that we're evaluating candidates on a rolling basis. And from she can't share a lot of what's going on, but in general, the results of those surveys and retreat overall are pushing us in a direction where we want to be more active in the social justice arena and hear more things from the pulpit. I think that's key, and that's something that was different in recent years. I think it's, some of us talked beforehand, I felt like my voice was getting lost. We get 100 or 200 or however many hundreds of emails a day. If Kate is posting yet another activity to do, it's tuned out. If the pastor says it, people hear it. So I think that's the direction we'll be hearing more.
John.
I absolutely agree with what you've heard so far is absolutely consistent with what we've done. So I'm going to try not to repeat that. So any of these churches, I think, can be a model. And also there are several others that we could direct you to. John, what's his church?
The Arlington Presbyterian.
Yeah. So two things I'm going to add is that our church, that this was incredible. Before Diane got there from Falls Church, and she had been interested in voice, and she was in an influence in Falls Church, joining voice. And so she brought that to Clifton. But Clifton, for years before, I don't know when it started, has had a minute for mission every Sunday after the sermon and just before the benediction. Every Sunday.
We do that.
Do you?
Yeah, we've done that for decades.
Yeah. Now, a church this big, that'd be kind of hard to do, but there's and from the laughter of the what is it, the church information form? You know, you all know what that is. That's great. You know, so there's a bunch of talent here and resources so that not one person has to do the, like in our church, one person does them in information, and he's the saint of the church, so he can say anything he wants. And it's always on target. Here you'd have to be more prepared, so it would really have to be a 3-minute, you know, a 3-minute permission. But you could do that at church this time. The other thing that I did was that I didn't mention was join the mission committee. So I didn't want to push Diane. As a friend, I didn't want to get in the way of how she felt about how it should move forward. But Voice has a particular process, so I tried to observe that. But there's no external deadline. That's really nice. It's a relation building. You're building relationships, and that fits very well with my worldview. You know, it's relationship building. For me, it's cross-cultural. So in Voice, there are lots of opportunities for me to build relationships. So any of you can start to investigate Voice. So where's the next meeting? Can you involve me in something? Get involved. You need to initiate that individually.
Without the church having to become an official.
Exactly. So it'd be great if the half a dozen of you did that, but at least one or two, so that you're investigating and building, using the vocabulary you have in the church and moving it forward. Because there is movement where you are, but there are things to do. The other thing that you would be involved in, the 50 people that you send messages out to, at least once a year, Voice has an event where they speak to the local officials of the church about the issues that are important, which are now homelessness and mental health mainly. And it's very well rehearsed. It's very well prepared. The officials know what's coming. This is not a wild rally. It is a rally, and it is politics, but it's civics. This is civics. It's just good government. And Voice, and it feels like a congregation, and it's usually done in the church, speaks to those in power. And I've never seen that before. I mean, I know you all probably have in this part of the country, but I come from the sticks. And I did know the politicians personally, but I've not seen speaking to power.
And I'll just add a detail to that. On July 9th of this year, we had over 700 people show up at a church in Triangle and with Governor Youngkin and a number of other public officials to talk about youth mental health. And that was reflected recently in the budget resolution that just happened down in Richmond. And we're following up as a result of that with a mental health summit to talk about how we can support and increase efforts toward youth mental health throughout the state of Virginia, as well as crisis receiving centers, which are alternatives to incarceration for people in mental health crisis. So,
Dan, why don't you continue and just say more
Sure.
about Trinity and your experiences over the last several years and successes, failures, challenges, and the way forward.
well, and while I'm on Voice, I just want to add a couple of other
Please,
details.
please.
Voice consists of over 40 member congregations throughout Northern Virginia, from Prince William up to Alexandria and Arlington. And they have 4 organizing staff, paid staff.
Paid staff.
So I just want to put that out there. And it is in terms of relationship and inter-congregational, what's the other term for that?
Ecumenical?
Thank you.
Ecumenical.
Yeah,
So
interaction. So,
can you just give a flavor of the ecumenical participation? So it's.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. Members just within Arlington, which is where I'm most active, are Darl Hijra Mosque, Temple Road of Shalom. We have Baptist, well, actually Manassas Baptist, First Manassas Baptist has supplied our president, whatever he is, director of Voice, which is an African-American congregation, and one of our organizers as well, Reverend Kenneth Nixon. We also have, again, across we have Catholic congregations, and like OLQP, or Our Lady Queen of Peace in Arlington. So it's a real interfaith organization, and it has absolutely been an enrichment and a blessing to me and our congregation to be able to develop relationships across congregations. And we've had those folks come into our congregation to provide education. So that the Voice has served many purposes beyond just its core purpose, which is to advocate for a change in policies toward justice for those who are the least lost and the last. Now at Trinity,
Yep.
We are, as everybody, still struggling to figure out the best way to do this. Right, I'm inspired in a way by your 2-person team. We had 4 people show up at our committee meeting the other night, and yet those 4 people have relationships throughout the congregation, and we have, as a result, we have a member who hasn't been able, can't make it to our committee meetings now because nobody wants to come to a committee meeting. Let's face it. People want to show up and do a thing is what I've heard over and over again from our committee members. And so that's, as a leader, that's become my mantra, is how can I set it up so that individuals can show up and do a thing? And that's especially for parents of young children, and retirees, whatever it is. And so we have somebody who has connections to a professor of African American Studies in North Carolina who is coming up here to do a class for us in the fall. We have connections at the Resurrection Church in DC that sent a couple of thespians to do a dramatic reading of Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail that they call Tunnel of Hope. It's very inspiring. We have folks who, one couple that adopted Indigenous children and have become very active in the Indigenous rights activities around the region, and even composed we now have a land acknowledgement prayer that we read before committee meetings. So it really, our energy has come mostly from our younger members, compared to me, everybody's younger, but that our parents who are trying to bring up their kids and are also very engaged in other aspects of our community. One is a member of the NAACP. We have one member who is like the super advocate. He's on the boards of, I think, 5 different nonprofits, including he's the head of the Potomac River Keepers. So, we really plug into individual relationships with people who are doing other things in the community and have them kind of bring it back to us. is one of the ways that we do it.
Thanks. So the last question, and then would like to open it up, see if you all have some questions. Comes from an article that was in a Washington Post 2 weeks ago in the religion section. And it was about attitudes towards race among Christians. And in it, there was a professor of sociology from Baylor University, whose name is George Yancey. And I was particularly struck by this quote. "We have taken our overall polarization and we place it into the racial debate. Politics, rather than people's religious beliefs, shape attitudes about race." So my question is, if you are willing to take a stab at it, is how might we flip that and have religious beliefs and tradition inform attitudes towards race and eventually maybe to our politics rather than the reverse, which we're experiencing, I believe, right now. And we'll start with my colleague Melynda.
Well, Steve shared that quote with me earlier this week. And you know, what I thought of when I read it was the election of Barack Obama. I think that's when our attitudes toward race became political, unfortunately. And so I think that somehow we have to undo that and unlearn that. And I think that because it has become political, it means that it has to be taken out of the pulpit. And not 100%, but I think it makes it harder to have it, to have a message come from the pulpit. But I think there are messages of hope in just being able to have conversations about it. And if we can just begin to have more conversations about the real effects of racism in our society, the systems of racism that still exist, and that it's about real people in their real lives, and it is not political, it's social justice. I think that can be a help, and the extent to which we can, as a faith community, enable those conversations to happen. I think it's a, individual by individual effort, and it's slow going and it's hard work. But it's a very inarticulate answer to your question.
No, it's a really hard question.
It's a very hard question, but I do know from, what I've learned from Cliff Johnson is that those hard conversations can happen in the context of a faith community. And if Cliff Johnson could do it in the 50s and 60s, then we ought to be able to do it today. And so that's really my hope, is that by understanding each other better, we can sort of transcend the political part, and show that this isn't about politics. This is really about
Jesus teaching.
Thank you.
yeah, and
Simple.
exactly,
It's real
and
simple, and it should be in the pulpit, because this is what Jesus taught.
Yeah.
Just focus on that, and then it's not political, it's what Jesus said.
Yeah.
Period. I mean, I just feel like it has to be from the pulpit, totally.
Yeah.
And until it is not going to be recognized as coming from the leadership,
Mhm.
because we have to accept the fact that so many of our members only hear what comes from the pulpit. I would say the majority of our members only hear what comes from the pulpit. They don't read the bulletin, they don't come to church school, they don't do personal study, they only hear from the pulpit. So if it doesn't come from the pulpit, it might as well not be a part of the church.
Dan, let's
Sorry, I
Dan,
didn't
no,
mean
no, no,
to-
no,
No.
Dan, give everybody a chance to
Right.
say something. So Dan,
So I will say that the way that I think about it in the way that I've been taught to think about it from Trinity, is that we have a real emphasis on small group ministry and on relationship among our members at Trinity. So we have a strong men's fellowship, we have strong women's circles, we have strong youth programming. And so those are, if you will, like just fellowship activities. And as a result, those of us who see things from a social justice standpoint get to have conversations with others who have concerns. And I've had some public disagreements with other members of our church, like when we joined Voice and they asked, does this really have to be under the racial justice ministry? Because it's so much broader than race. And I can get passionate too. And my response was, is there something about the term racial justice that's aversive to you? And so that we've had those conversations. I followed up with that member, by the way, at a fellowship gathering. And we had a really nice conversation, and that's the way that it's worked. And yes, we have had it from the pulpit. Our pastor is devoted to social justice, racial justice, gender equality, trans equality, trans rights. We have a pastor who both has personal experience with all of the above and preaches the word. And when it gets a little bit edgy out of the comfort zone of our members, we come alongside and we have those difficult conversations out of a sense of community and Christian family. So that's how we do it.
So John and Kate, if you forgive me, since we only have a few minutes left, I wanted to see if there are any questions or comments from the group. Yes, please.
What about tradition as far as race is concerned, attitudes toward it? You know, like this gentleman said in the South where the teacher said black blood's as good as white blood, you know? Did that have anything to do with politics?
It did then. It did that.
Which the Republicans or the Democrats?
It was Ku Klux Klan then. That was a big political organization in the South.
I know I run my mouth too much, but I just want to say that we make the distinction between politics and partisanism.
I was gonna say that, yes.
Yes, that these issues are political.
And Jesus was absolutely a political figure.
Yes, but not partisan. And it's very important to make that distinction.
Please.
I love my wife, but I hear a lot about her views. Could I hear from the other three of you how you would address the members of our congregation who were nervous about what is sometimes portrayed as mixing of politics and religion? And speak, if you could, speak in particular to the members of the congregation who see this place as a refuge in some sense from the political sturm and drang of the day, and feel that from 11 a.m. to noon, they need some quiet space that doesn't involve politics.
And I would say the listening meetings go directly to that issue. Because the issue for us is to try to be sure that we touch all of those people with one-on-one relationships, so that we're listening to them about what is their heartbreak, and that starts a story, and we've listened to them, and we try to incorporate those exact people into our mission work, so they're not left out.
It's
I-
really, really difficult. So Rocky, our previous pastor, he was very strong privately on, being political versus being partisan. Some of us feel and he was very conscious of not wanting to lose members if they viewed something that was political, if they viewed that as partisan. Some of us feel though that it was too hands-off, not too much, not wanting to scare off some people. So I just think that's really hard. I think, as I said before, that looking towards a new pastor, to be looking for something a little more actively political. I was just reading part of Melynda's work yesterday, and I was fascinated by Cliff Johnson, and I don't know if all of you have read this yet, but it blew me away how honest he was about his own mixed feelings about race and how it affected he and his life personally, versus how he felt about the need for the church to be out there in front and leading on racial justice issues. I would like to see, yes, some of the language he used was not the current language, but overall, I think he, kind of like Bill Sangle, a previous pastor at OPMA, just really out in front of promoting racial justice. And he seemed to, or he did say, well, if we lose a few people on this end or lose a few people on this end, so be it. So it's a difficult question.
Dan?
So I, as many of us, I work a difficult job. I'm actually a clinical social worker. I work with folks in severe crisis and need. And I come to church for refuge, inspiration, recentering in my faith. So when we talk about refuge, I don't think that refuge is passive. And I think that we get refuge from inspiration, from recentering in our Christian faith, in the words of Jesus, and the writers of the Bible. And so the way that we sometimes agree or disagree on how those words get acted on, thought about now, should continue to be as they were in the early church, again, based in relationship care, pastoral care for one another. And that's always been what has kept me at a church where, we really do pride ourselves in being a big tent church. That all views are respected and welcomed. And we've had some rather contentious disagreements, and yes, have we lost some members? But not because we didn't want them.
Well, on that positive thought, let me ask you to join me in appreciating our panel.